What if I told you that all an NFL team needed to win a Super Bowl was for a sexual predator to remember how to throw a football? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about here today in this deep dive series where we break down all 32 teams leading up to the number one team in my power rankings. Many of you following the series have been very vocal that I have the Cleveland Browns rated too high here with the number 9 spot in these rankings. Well, Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski have assembled an amazing collection of talent here in Cleveland. This just might be the best roster in the entire NFL, which is why I am a little bit higher on this Browns team than you may have expected. I'm excited to get into all of the different pieces of this team throughout this video. But before we do get started, if you could do me a huge favor, take just a second to hit that like button down below. A ton goes into this series. It's really important to me that these videos do well. That like button really does help. It takes just a second. Thank you in advance. If you enjoy the content, also make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of these remaining deep dives and my NFL regular season content just around the corner. But let's get into it, as always, starting by taking a look at this team's offseason. And the Browns, as I mentioned, have put together an amazing roster, and they have done so by stacking up a bunch of really good offseasons in a row, and this offseason is no different. For those that have followed the series, I'm making some slight tweaks again here to this segment. You'll have to let me know what you think of this format. But we're going to start by taking a look at all of this team's departures and their impact on the Browns. And a big part of what makes this offseason so nice is that in that unreplaced losses category, the true downgrades department, 0. They did not lose anybody on this roster without either upgrading them or having a good replacement plan in place. That's not to say, though, that they didn't let anybody go. In fact, you have to start with the coaching staff, where they make a big change, saying goodbye to Joe Woods as their defensive coordinator. Joe Woods was a part of about 3 or 4 defensive coordinators that I highlighted in a video, really showing the weaknesses in a lot of Fangio tree coordinators and talking about how these guys were not doing a good job balancing that scheme with actually making adjustments and calling good plays defensively. And it really was that way with Joe Woods. He was a problem for the Browns defense. He was a detractor from a really talented group. And they aren't just getting addition by subtraction by letting Joe Woods go, but they bring in Jim Schwartz, who was just kind of sitting around waiting for another spot as a defensive coordinator. I think he was an assistant for the Titans last year after being the defensive coordinator for that Super Bowl Eagles team under Doug Peterson. And I've always been a big fan of Jim Schwartz. I don't think he's a defensive genius or anything, but I do think he's an upgrade to Joe Woods. And we'll talk more about Jim Schwartz in a minute. But then with the roster, they are going to lose Jadeveon Clowney, a big name, but they are upgrading by getting Zadarius Smith from the Vikings. And then on the interior defensive line, saying goodbye to Taven Bryan, who played about 60% of their snaps last year, upgrading really in 2 different players, both better than Taven Bryan, Dalvin Tomlinson, and Shelby Harris. So those are going to be their key losses that they actually turned around and got better at. And then you have more losses here that were just replaced, not necessarily upgraded or downgraded. That's where John Johnson is going to leave, and they're going to bring in Juan Thornhill from the Chiefs. I'm going to be calling that one a push. And then you've got the losses with a succession plan in place, and this is a unique one here with Jacoby Brissett leaving to the Washington Commanders with, of course, Deshaun Watson ready to step in. Well, Watson was worse than Jacoby was last year, but as we'll talk about in this video, they're hoping that's not the case again next year. And then you have more of your inconsequential departures that don't make much of a difference. Kareem Hunt is leaving. He's still a free agent, was just a shell of himself last year. Their backup center, Hjalti Froholt, now the Cardinals starting center, he was playing due to a injury to their starter, so not necessarily going to miss him. Deion Jones was a street free agent at linebacker, not his former self either. And then Ronnie Harrison, a rotational safety for them, is also not back with the team. And that's all great, but then you look at their additions and you really start to see where this offseason was pretty nuts for the Browns. Just a ridiculous influx of talent here. Granted, a lot of it at depth spots, but we already mentioned those 5 key additions: Jim Schwartz, Zadarius Smith, Dalvin Tomlinson, Shelby Harris, Juan Thornhill, but also going out, spending a second-round pick to bring in Elijah Moore, the receiver from the Jets, and they get one of their starting linebackers back healthy this year in Anthony Walker. Those are going to be your more key additions, but they also had a nice list of kind of mid-sized additions, some mid-round picks, including Cedric Tillman at wide receiver, DeJuan Jones, who they stole in the 4th round to give them tackle depth, Siaki Ika, a nose tackle that they took in the 3rd round, really stole a lot of value despite not having a first-round pick this year in the draft. I loved what they were able to do there in April. But it doesn't stop there. They get Nick Harris, who was slated to be their starting center last year in the preseason, back healthy. They also signed Agbanya Okoronkwo, an underrated edge who they were ready to make him their starting edge until Zadarius Smith became available for them. And then also Rodney McLeod. This is what makes this Brown staff so great, is they don't just draft well. They don't just bring in the big free agents, but they also have a really good pro scouting staff. Rodney McLeod, despite his age, had a super season for the Colts last year. I was stunned they did not bring him back. The fact that he's going to be safety depth for them is just winning between the margins. And then they had a bunch of smaller additions as well. The rest of their draft class there, highlighted by DTR in the 6th round. Luke Whippler, the center out of Ohio State that many thought should have been drafted a lot higher. Additionally, though, they add even more playmakers to this room. Marquise Goodwin, who had a good year for Seattle last year before getting hurt. They hope to get Jakeem Grant back, who missed last season for an injury. Speedy wide receiver and a kick returner. They also bring in Jordan Akins. Talk about that good pro scouting. Had a quietly good year for the Houston Texans last year. Along with some other roster fillers. They did not stop with what they probably felt was already a pretty good roster last year. They did not stop and really filled out this roster in a pretty special way. So as you recap what positions they got better at, where they downgraded, I see 5 positions clearly upgraded: wide receiver, edge, interior defensive line, linebacker, getting Anthony Walker back healthy, and then, of course, at defensive coaching, maybe the biggest of all, saying goodbye to Joe Woods. No positions downgraded, and then one position is left up in the air, and it is that also important quarterback position, which is going to make it such a fascinating conversation related to Deshaun Watson getting his first crack at a full season. But before we dive into the full roster breakdown, let's talk a little bit more about this coaching staff, how they stack up against the rest of the league, along with what the schemes are going to look like on both sides of the ball. So you have Kevin Stefanski at the top, the head coach, who definitely lost a lot of his luster as last season went on. Not just the fact that the team's season didn't go according to plan, but for the first time, I think some very legitimate criticisms about his play calling starting to show up. But when you have a backup quarterback in there, it does make things a little bit more challenging. It's nothing that I'm terribly worried about. It's more, I say play calling, it's more related to like game management stuff in terms of when to run the ball, when to let the clock milk down, all that stuff. It's cost this team games, and from a head coaching perspective, those are his responsibility that he hasn't necessarily handled to the best of his ability. I do rank Kevin Stefanski 23rd among NFL head coaches, which is a pretty sizable drop from where he was last year in the top half. There's also just a lot of ascending coaches that have passed him by. I still like Kevin Stefanski. I still believe in him, but I think when it comes to game management, when it comes to team culture and earning that benefit of the doubt, those sides of being a head coach, I think you can raise some legitimate questions. And as a matter of fact, they rank dead last in the NFL for me for that sort of benefit of the doubt slider that we do for this series, the overall coach and culture grade. If anybody doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt, it's the Cleveland Browns. And a lot of people when they argue the Browns shouldn't be ranked 9th, believe me, I get it. This does hurt them. Like, if they ranked just average at overall coaching culture, they'd be even a few spots higher, because that's how good I think this roster is. But they do need to learn how to win as a football team. It's not just about being a team built on paper, and a lot of that's going to come down to Kevin Stefanski this year and getting it right. Now, in terms of like actual offensive coordinating with Kevin Stefanski and Alex Van Pelt underneath him, I feel a little bit better in that department. I like the scheme that they run. Obviously, it's very much the Shanahan style scheme. But Stefanski is a really good run game coach. I mean, they were 5th in run game DVOA last year, 1st the year before that. You look at the way they use those guards specifically as weapons in a way that they can literally call whatever they want in the run game. Of course, wide zone being the foundation of the run game, but bouncing counter off of that. They love to just go pin and pull, power, trap. They really vary their run game, and more often than not, it's incredibly effective. And those guards certainly help, but you have to know when to pull what levers. As far as the pass game being designed here, I don't think between Alex Van Pelt and Kevin Stefanski, they've shown a ton of genius on that department beyond your typical, standard play action shot plays that are all in a Kyle Shanahan playbook. Not that it holds them back or anything, but I don't really have any raving reports about the design of the passing game here. But with improved weapons and a full year with Deshaun Watson, I think this is going to be a chance for Stefanski and Van Pelt to kind of open up their breadth of passing game play calls, if you will, this season. So they rank 3rd to 6th in run game coaching. And then more in the 20s for pass game coaching, but overall still pretty good in that department, obviously. But then you bring in Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator. Just love the overall upgrade. I've really beaten into the dirt my issues with Fangio-style schemes, and it was really the two criticisms I have of Fangio-style schemes are the light boxes, not being willing to load the box and stop the run, where the Browns were easily one of the worst run defenses in the league last year, but also playing squishy quarters, zone coverage, and just a lack of physicality in general to get in receivers' face and deny easy first downs. This is a complete mentality shift, because Jim Schwartz is much more of an aggressive, classic, almost throwback attacking 4-3 scheme. It's going to be a lot of single high structures, I believe, a lot of cover 3, a lot of cover 1, blitzing with 5-man rushes, stunting up front. They're going to get after it, and it's going to be a very welcomed change of pace for a defense that has all of the roster talent in the world to live up to the task, really. But I do think we will still see some quarters. I don't think they're going to just weed that out entirely, but it's going to be a much healthier balance, I think, of when to get aggressive and when to do some more of that kind of top-down, bend-don't-break style stuff. And I think Jim Schwartz, with all of his experience, I mean, he's been a defensive coordinator since 2001 under Jeff Fisher and the Rams. He's coordinated some incredible defenses throughout his career, and I think very highly of this hiring. They come in that massive tier, though, of just good defensive coaching, which ranks anywhere from 14th to 29th. It's a wide range. There's a lot of good defensive coordinators in the NFL. The Browns went from not having one to now having one, which is a big upgrade for this staff. Training camps are here and football season is just around the corner, but at Underdog Fantasy, you don't have to wait until late August or early September to draft your favorite players and compete for huge cash payouts. In fact, Underdog's Best Ball Mania 4 is the biggest fantasy football competition of all time with, wait for it, $15 million in cash winnings. Best Ball is draft, set it, and forget it. No waivers, no trades. Underdog will retroactively give you your best lineup every week, which means no sitting there on Mondays, making your friends act like they care about which players you left on the bench that week. I've loved filling out my Best Ball teams this summer, and I know you will too. And right now, if you sign up using promo code TFG at Underdog Fantasy, not only will you support this channel in a big, big way, but they will match up to $100 on your first deposit. That's 4 free entries into the Best Ball Mania competition or a season's long worth of entries into daily pick'em contests. which are the best way to enjoy NFL games even more with a shot of winning up to 20 times your entry. So that is a match of up to $100 on your first deposit when you sign up right now at Underdog Fantasy. But now it's time to get into this ridiculous roster, but it is very fitting that the first piece we're going to talk about here is the quarterback room, which of course is the most important piece in any team, but I think Deshaun Watson here is the largest high variance factor, the biggest wild card, if you will, for any team in the entire NFL when you factor in the stakes that if he can get back to his old self, this team could be borderline unbeatable. And we're going to keep this to a football conversation because my opinions on Deshaun Watson are well documented and the Browns going to trade for him and all that. But from a football perspective, the last time he played a full season of football, he was at worst the fourth best quarterback in the NFL. And it was that level of play that got the Browns to trade multiple first-round picks, to give him the largest guaranteed contract in NFL history, to a guy that we hadn't seen play football in 2 years. And when he stepped in last season, I had as much fun as anybody rooting against him, watching him fail, play like literal cheeks. I enjoyed it. But at the same time, thinking rationally about this, I said coming into the year, I wouldn't expect him to hit the ground running. And it was probably going to be a wasted season last year, and that's exactly what happened. So while it was fun to see Deshaun Watson fail last year, I think when you think rationally about this, he is now a full year getting to be the full-time starter in practice with the offense fully designed around his skill set. He gets to get that full chemistry built with an improved receiving cast. Another year in a Kevin Stefanski system that is very predicated on playing in structure and being on time. And to just assume that in 6 games, after not playing for 2 years, that he can't go back to being even the 8th best quarterback in the NFL, when again, the last time we saw him play, he was a prolific, quasi-elite quarterback. To act like that guy is just for sure truly gone is borderline moronic. Like, we just don't know. And ranking Deshaun Watson for this Browns team is the hardest quarterback ranking I've had to give any quarterback in the history of this series, because he was horrible last year. He looked like a quarterback that hadn't read defenses before. His timing within the offense was brutal. He was holding onto the ball, seemingly staring at open receivers, but not pulling the trigger. He just looked incredibly uncomfortable. But the thing is, there was no physical drop-off. He still had a great arm. I saw tons of play extension that made him so special in Houston, where he can get out of sacks. He's one of the best at eluding sacks in the entire league. He looked athletic when he scrambled, and it's just a matter of him getting comfortable in this offense and learning to play in structure again, basically, after being away from football for so long. Now, it is fair to say that that's never been a huge strength in his game, and it is possible that all of the sexual assault lawsuits and 2 years out of football and having to play in a new system that's nothing like Bill O'Brien's spread scheme, or more spread scheme, if you will. It is possible that he just isn't a good quarterback anymore, right? That's what makes this so difficult. Ultimately, I lean on the side of thinking he's going to just be okay. I think he's probably just going to be a top half of the league starter. I think there's going to be moments, there's going to be games where he's still not fully clicking in structure and picking apart defenses. There will be costly mistakes. Even his accuracy, it felt like last year, wasn't quite what it was in Houston. Like, I think it's somewhere in between where he was in Houston and what we saw for him for the Browns last year. And I think that's somewhere around the 12th best quarterback in the NFL. And if we get that, again, this comes in as the 9th best team in the NFL. They are easily a team that can compete for a Super Bowl with a, let's just call it a Kirk Cousins level quarterback, although their styles are incredibly different and the consistency is a little bit different, but I think you get the point there. But if he's closer to what he was in Houston, which again is possible, I think this team's going to be a world beater. Like, I think it's going to be one of the best offenses in the NFL. We'll talk about the defense later, which I clearly think highly of. Like, This team, I think, has the highest potential of any team in the NFL, and that all comes down to Deshaun Watson remembering how to quarterback. And it's definitely going to be, I think, the biggest variable that we're going to have to wait and see how it plays out this year. Now, as far as the backups are concerned, they bring in Josh Dobbs, who's another mobile quarterback that the Titans famously kind of brought in off the street, and he played pretty well for them. I think he's probably their QB2 to start the year as a low-end backup. But, I mean, the way Dorian Thompson-Robinson is playing in the preseason right now, a guy that had generated a lot of pre-draft hype, really good kid. I got to meet him out in Vegas for the Shrine Bowl, and definitely pulling for him to let's just pull for him to overtake Deshaun Watson this year, because from a character perspective, it doesn't get a whole lot different from DTR to Deshaun Watson. I did have some questions on DTR's overall arm talent in terms of the ability to throw the deep ball and make throws off platform, but it's looked pretty good so far in the preseason. So we definitely have our eyes on DTR. We don't expect him to have to play, but definitely a guy generating a lot of buzz at this point in time. But it is just preseason, you know. And then Kellen Mond is kind of an afterthought at this point. I don't think Kellen Mond has it. He was so robotical coming out, and I don't think he's been able to play loose or play within himself at the NFL level. So I mean, he might get stashed on the practice squad, but I don't see him making the team at this point. So again, they ranked 12th at quarterback, which could range anywhere from 5th to 28th. You know, it's a crazy X factor for this team, and I don't know. You don't know. We're just going to have to wait and see. But the rest of this roster is, as I've said already many times, absolutely locked and loaded, ready to go. And that's all going to start with the weaponry, where they rank 17th in a league loaded with high-end weaponry. 17th is a very respectable ranking. And the Browns, for what it's worth, have a true alpha type of wide receiver in Amari Cooper. And I think Cooper is even underrated at this point. I don't know if it's because his trade capital was so low as a 5th-round pick, which is one of the all-time trade heists I can remember, like in a league where wide receivers are in such high demand. The fact that the Browns went and got him for a 5th-round pick is honestly a source of a lot of optimism that I have for this Browns team. But you watch the tape last year, and he still has that incredible route running, which at 6'1", 215 pounds is not only just impressive that he can move that way, but that size helps him, you know, shrug guys off at the line in his release package, deal with physical, grabby contact down the field. It's really borderline Devontae Adams-esque in terms of the way he moves at that size and the way it can help him separate. But he's got speed to threaten as a vertical threat. He's dangerous after the catch because of the size and speed combination. And then it felt like last year he took a step up in terms of being that just ball winner on the outside. I know he's had flashes of it in his career, but in the second half of the year last year, as Jacoby Brissett heated up, and then even as Deshaun Watson entered the picture, he was that guy that these quarterbacks could trust in a pinch to just, you know, go give him a chance to go make a play, and he used that frame to convert those tough catches. And that's when you really start to talk about Amari Cooper being the definition of a true alpha. Yeah, he hasn't done it at the consistency of some of these other top 5 wide receivers, but in terms of a guy that can threaten to all 3 levels, win in every individual way, and be someone that they can truly design this passing game through, that is Amari Cooper. And you want to talk about like his production in fantasy football, I am targeting him about a round higher than I'm seeing him going on Underdog. I think he's going to have a monster season, call it 1,400 yards, 8+ touchdowns. I think he's going to finish the year around a top 10 fantasy wide receiver, and is going to prove a lot of people wrong this year, and really ultimately go down as one of the trade heists of the decade at least. Now, these other 2 guys I think are really nice pieces that make sense within this offense in Donovan Peoples-Jones and Elijah Moore. But I think if you're a little bit more skeptical about how consistent can this passing game be, are these guys reliable options, down in, down out, week in, week out? You pair that with some potential weekly inconsistency with Deshaun Watson, and that's where I could start to see some skepticism show up for this passing game. But that's not to say I don't believe that Donovan Peoples-Jones and Elijah Moore can't settle in as dream complementary pieces to a guy like Amari Cooper. And I think if Deshaun Watson returns to his old self, you're going to see Donovan Peoples-Jones and Elijah Moore start to reach their upside. But let's start with Donovan Peoples-Jones, who honestly, his skill set at this point reminds me a ton of Michael Pittman for the Indianapolis Colts, because size-wise, they're pretty similar, about 6'2", 6'3", north of 200 pounds, bigger bodied wide receivers, good athletes at that size, though not necessarily burners. The reason I go with the Pittman comparison is Peoples-Jones is really effective under the radar at like crossing routes, slants, digs, benders, working the middle of the field. He's sneaky good after the catch, just like a guy like Michael Pittman. But what Peoples-Jones doesn't have that Pittman does is going to be the hands consistency. Not just from a contested catch perspective, but literally just dropping balls when he's open. And that's just the one area that you're going to have to see Donovan Peoples-Jones prove that he's good at. Until then, you're just not going to see the trust in him from the receiver, from the play caller to make him a designated read on certain passing concepts. Until you can count on him and his hands at his size, you're not going to look at him as anything other than just an adequate starter. But that's not to say he doesn't do a lot of nice things and that he hasn't flashed really amazing hands at times. And to be fair, the true drops, like when he was open this year, got cleaned up. But you go back a year, drop rate of over 10% was not great. But the contested catch percentage for a bigger-bodied wide receiver in Donovan Peoples-Jones, down there at 38% on 29 contested catch looks. That's just not going to cut it. You know, Michael Pittman being the comparison in skill set is much more of a 55-60% contested catch guy. So that's the thing you're going to keep an eye out for. I think a lot of that is a confidence thing, and we'll see where it goes this year. Regardless, I think he's a nice piece, but I think he has potential to turn into a good number two in the way that Pittman has become. And then you got Elijah Moore, who we feel very good about his route running, his ability to separate, his ability with the ball in his hand. And then you've got Elijah Moore, who, if this works, is like the ideal fit here. You can put him in the slot where, you know, for the most part, you're going to have Cooper and Peoples-Jones on the outside, though those guys can flex inside when you want them to. But for the most part, you can put Elijah Moore in the slot, utilize his incredible route running. He catches everything, even though it has to be an accurate pass because he doesn't have a large catch radius. He's small. He's about 5'9". He's a good run after catch threat. You can get him designed touches on jet pop passes. You can line him up as a running back in the backfield, which we've seen Stefanski do with guys like Amari Cooper before. So I really think Stefanski has a plan for Elijah Moore. There's nothing about his film going back to college and what we've seen from him on the field at the NFL level that says he can't play. It's just a matter of him producing and earning that confidence and proving that he can be consistent, really. And I don't even want to say it's like off field with him that would hold him back, because it's not like he's a bad character guy or someone that's going to not show up to practice. It's more like his headspace just needs to be in the right place because of everything that transpired with the Jets. And if they can make him comfortable here, get him to play with confidence, you could really have a dangerous trio of really complementary skill sets there. But for me, it does not stop there. They drafted Cedric Tillman in the 3rd round, who's already looked good in the preseason. I thought he was someone that was going to sneak up into the top 40 or 50 picks, really in the same, for the same reason that I think we saw Jonathan Mingo go with the 40th pick or whatever for the Panthers. He brought a true vertical skill set as a big-bodied wide receiver that not a lot of receivers in this draft did. So again, just stealing second-round value, in my opinion, in the 3rd round. Tillman is someone that's dealt with injuries throughout his career, so he's got to stay healthy. But he has true X wide receiver potential. I think Devontae Parker was my pro comp for him. And I love bringing him in because you don't need him to be good. It's a third round pick. If he never plays here, it's not the end of the world. But I think between him and Donovan Peoples-Jones, those are two very talented players with a chance to be a complementary X opposite of Amari Cooper. And it basically just gives you an extra dice roll that you can get one of these guys to work out. So if you get to week 7, week 8, and Donovan Peoples-Jones is only converting 30% of his contested catches and the drop issues show up again, you bench him and you put in Cedric Tillman, who's fully ready to go. He's a redshirt senior coming out, pretty good route runner at his size, and there's no reason he really couldn't step in and play right away. So love that draft pick. Definitely going to be keeping an eye on him. And then Marquise Goodwin's a nice pickup as well, especially in a spot here, unlike in Seattle or what he's had in San Francisco in years past where he's had to start. Here, you can theoretically keep him healthy because he's only going to play 5 or 6 snaps a game. He gives you exactly what they were hoping they could get in Anthony Schwartz, just that guy that you can put in there as a flanker. Again, 5 or 6 times a game, say run a post, off of those play action shot plays, run a go ball, and burn deep, where he can actually track the deep ball and come down with it, unlike Anthony Schwartz, who's just a track guy. So I love that signing for what he is, and I think he's got a good chance to stay healthy within this role. He's an underrated player overall. By the way, he's a good route runner and a good complete receiver, but anytime someone's asked him to get significant snaps, he gets hurt. So I love what they have in mind for him, I think. And then Jakeem Grant, it can be a gadget threat if you don't want to do that with Elijah Moore, but I think they'll just keep him as a return man where he's sensational, hopefully can contribute to special teams. He missed the season last year. But then I imagine it's a competition here for the wide receiver 7 spot. You've got really 5 wide receivers that are noteworthy here. You got David Bell, who they overdrafted last year, in my opinion. So far, that's aging out well for me. We'll see. Obviously, still young, but I just didn't see the athletic tools to be a good receiver at the next level. He struggled to produce for them in decent snaps last year as a third-round pick. I do like Jalen Darden. I don't mind taking a flyer on him. Honestly, I had a similar evaluation on Darden as I did on Elijah Moore, both in the same draft. Only thing with Darden is it's more of the football awareness side of things that he struggled with. He ended up getting washed out in Tampa because he could never get on the same page with Tom Brady and be in the right place at the right time for Brady. But maybe in a system where he doesn't have to do as much thinking could benefit him if he makes the team. Anthony Schwartz, we talked about. And then Michael Woods, another kind of possession receiver, along with Jalen Wayne. So they're all somewhat talented players in some regard. We'll see if they keep a 7th. It's a good problem to have for a wide receiver 7 on your depth chart. It's a really deep group. And then you get to the tight end, and it's deep there as well. David Njoku has really impressed me with his development. I think his game is really matured, both in terms of hands consistency and as a run blocker, which there's no denying his physical tools and his ability to be a mismatch problem as a tight end. And really his ability to come down with sensational catches. He's been doing that going back to his college days, but it's just been a matter of pairing the ability for the spectacular with the more down in, down out consistency. Last year was by far his best year. You could even argue the arrow is pointing up for David Njoku. There's only so much love to go around in this passing game, though, so we'll see. Even if he doesn't play better than he did last year, you're still getting a really good tight end there, though. Probably a fringe top 10 tight end in David Njoku. They bring in Jordan Akins, who's going to be really nice for when they go 12 personnel. He's got kind of that Jonnu Smith build / skill set a little bit, where, he's not a great inline blocker and not a traditional Y tight end, but you put him in a spot where he can get into space from the wing. He can block linebackers and safeties on those lead blocks. He's going to be a useful player as that tight end too. All these Shanahan style schemes, for the most part, have a guy like this. Mike Cole Pruitt, Jonnu Smith, Gerald Everett, those types. Akins is in that mold and had his best year last year. So I like that signing. Don't just dismiss him entirely. He can sneak up on some defenses this year. Then Harrison Bryant seems he's going to take a little bit more of a back seat. he just hasn't been able to put on weight and develop the run blocking aspect of the position, which is really important in this under center Stefanski run game. And even the hands stuff took a step back for him last year. So looked like a talented backup tight end coming into the league, but definitely took a step back last year. Not much to say about the rest of the guys competing for probably a practice squad spot. And then the running back room, it's mostly inconsequential. You know, Nick Chubb is a really good screen threat, but that's more of an extension of the run game in a lot of ways. Good check down threat as well. Not much of a route runner, but his hands have been solid. He's going to get you a couple hundred yards on through the air and be an option for what they ask of him. They're not going to line him up at wide receiver and ask him to be some mismatch problem, and that's fine. Beyond that, the only other guy worth noting is Demetric Felton, who, in theory, could have an opportunity to break out this year, depending how much they want to use Nick Chubb on third down. Felton was a remarkable route runner out of the backfield coming out of UCLA, and he's been effective when they've called his number, but they've had Kareem Hunt, who's a good third down back, so they haven't really had that opportunity for Felton, but year 3 might be the charm for Felton, and might be just another piece of this passing game that can be a headache for opposing defenses. So it's a really good group. Your secondary options at wide receiver still have a lot to prove in Peoples-Jones and Elijah Moore, but the talent is there, and this really could be a top 10 group of weapons come season's end. But now let's revisit those running backs as runners of the football, and we get to rave about Nick Chubb, who's going to get the crown here at the running back position as my RB1. And he gets that because he's just the complete package. He's got the size, the speed, incredibly rare, quick feet for a guy that is his size. Like, he can change lanes. He's got a nice shifty jump cut to make guys miss at the second level. He will put his head down and bowl through guys. He'll fight for tough yardage. He's not, he's not too good to fight for tough yardage. Like, he understands the importance he brings to the table to take what would be a 2-yard run for most people and turn it into a 4-yard run. And it's just, those add up over the course of a game and just make a 3rd and 5 into a 3rd and 3. And that stuff really matters, but you also have a back with explosive ability to hit home runs. Led the NFL last year in yards of 15 or yards more with 23 of them. Those are legitimate chunk gains in the run game, and he's a big reason why the Browns have been, number 5 in rushing DVOA last year, number 1 the year before that. He might not have the flash of some of these other guys, Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, but the down in, down out consistency of his game and the overall completeness of his game. And we already mentioned he's not even horrible as a receiving back. He's totally fine there, and might even have an opportunity to catch more passes with Hunt gone. Very little else to say about him. Should have another sensational season, expecting yet again over 1,500 yards, double-digit touchdowns, and to be the focal point of one of the best run games, if not the best, in the entire NFL. Now, the backups are less established than they've been in years past. No more Kareem Hunt. Even a guy like Dearness Johnson no longer here, who didn't really get any carries last year. But they do have some pieces here that I really think can step up and play well, at least as relief pitchers to Nick Chubb. Obviously, in an injury situation, you'd be pretty bummed here, and this would all of a sudden be one of the worst running back rooms in the league. But you look at Jerome Ford, who's a really talented runner coming out of Cincinnati. He's kind of like a super diet version of Nick Chubb in terms of his run style. Has light feet, has size, has some good speed. As a backup to Nick Chubb, he makes sense, and I think within this scheme, he's going to be efficient just as pretty much every other running back has. He's not a game changer, but I think he's just fine as a backup to Nick Chubb. Demetric Felton, I think, is mostly receiving game work. And then John Kelly, my dude John Kelly, just might finally be freed here. He's going off in the preseason. I loved him coming out, but nobody's been wanting to give him a chance. I don't know if it's the way he talks to coaches, or if he's late to practice all the time, or what the deal is, why he hasn't gotten a chance. But every time he plays, he looks the part as a guy with incredible contact balance and all the traits to at least be a good backup in the NFL. I know they list Ford ahead of him on the depth chart, but I would love to see John Kelly, and I think he would bring a little bit more of an it factor to this team. I honestly think he's very similar to like late career Kareem Hunt right now. Hasn't proven it or anything, but I just want to see him play so I can find out if my evaluation on him was right, because right now he just hasn't gotten that chance. They also have Jordan Wilkins, who got a decent amount of playing time for the Colts over a couple of years and was fine. So a bunch of replacement level options. Ford and Kelly are certainly interesting and might even surprise if they had to get significant workload, but you're optimistic that they won't have to. Chubb's been mostly healthy and available for this team. So first in the NFL at running back, thanks to Nick Chubb. And then the QB run multiplier is pretty good too. I actually was pleasantly surprised to see how much they tapped into Deshaun Watson on the ground game, in the read option game and stuff like that. I think that's a part of his game that they should be tapping into. I don't know if that was because he was struggling so much through the air and if they want to get away from that to potentially protect their $250 million man there, but he was effective on those design runs, and that's obviously something that can really change the numbers in the run game. So they're going to get a decent multiplier from the QB run, 1.5% to the total offensive run game score, which is tied for 11th in the NFL. All of their backups can run. Josh Dobbs, Kellen Mond, and then Dorian Thompson-Robinson has a potential to be like a extension of the running back room if he were to play. He's a super talented runner, one of the more instinctive, creative runners you'll see from a quarterback. Worth noting, but obviously you're kind of hoping you don't have to see that realistically, because if he's playing, something's probably gone south here. But let's talk about the offensive line. I try to tell you guys in the intro, this roster is absurd, and the Browns come in with my third overall offensive line. Almost very little to say about this group because it's mostly the same guys that have been together here for a couple years. We've already mentioned the run game, how high they've ranked there. They've all graded out pretty well in pass protection. They rank first in the NFL for me in run blocking and 7th in pass blocking. Not a single weak link on this group and several stars. So let's just go left to right. You got Jedrick Wills at left tackle, who I will admit has not taken those development steps you might have hoped for after a good rookie season. You might even argue his rookie season was his best. He's still been a good pass protector and a solid, if not inconsistent, run blocker. That's where he leaves a lot to be desired at times, is he just has really disappointing blocks in terms of latching and sustaining in the run game, but he's got the athleticism and play strength to drive guys off the ball. Would love to see that stage of his game take a step up this year. He was a high first-round pick and has all of the tools to do that, and I wouldn't be surprised if he had a career year here, but even if he's what he's been, he's a reliable pass protector who will lose, but is a good pass protecting left tackle, and if nothing else, something you're not worried about at left tackle, especially when he's got Joel Bitonio next to him. And Bitonio's just an all-pro caliber guard through and through. I mean, what else do you really want me to say about him? He's got the athleticism in the run game to block any scheme. He's got the play strength, the down block against power. He's a great wide zone blocker for this scheme. He pulls and annihilates guys in the move. Their screen game is thankful to have him. And he's locked down in pass protection as well. Great grip strength, technique, you name it. There's not a bad word to say about Joel Bitonio. And then you got Ethan Pocic, who had a breakout year at center. The run blocking had started to come along for Pocic in Seattle after being a relatively high draft pick for them. Seattle made that change to a wide zone blocking scheme a couple years ago, and Pocic finally kind of settled in with that. But Seattle ultimately let him go because he hasn't been a great pass protector, and he had a career year in pass protection. Now, that's still going to be an area of this offensive line that you say, if there's a weak link, it's don't leave Ethan Pocic one-on-one with Jeffrey Simmons. Okay, that's not the worst ask in the world. Overall, though, he was not a problem for them in pass protection on the season as a whole, and continued to take strides as a run blocker, where he is super fluid off the ball, really good in every regard in terms of run blocking. Then you got Wyatt Teller at right guard. Now, he's a little bit more inconsistent than like Joel Bitonio, but his better games are even better than Joel Bitonio because he is a nasty lineman with a mean streak. He's a really good athlete for move blocking. a true dickhead of a blocker, which I say that in the best way possible. But he will have weeks where he is a little bit more of a problem in pass protection. It's tough to get a beat necessarily on how good he is. Like, for the most part, has great games, but then some weeks he's slow with his feet, missing with his hands, just a little bit left to be desired in terms of, is he a great pass blocker? But he's still a damn good one. He himself, I would say, a Pro Bowl caliber guard and a total weapon in the run game. Then you get to right tackle, Jack Conklin. As long as he's healthy, which has been a slight holdup for him, as long as he's healthy, he's a total rock solid tackle, especially as a right tackle. He's one of the probably 5 to 8 best right tackles in the league. Traditionally is actually graded out much better as a run blocker than he has as a pass blocker. Last year kind of took a U-turn on that, where he actually had his best year in pass protection and struggled a little bit more as a run blocker. I don't know if that's because he didn't have Baker Mayfield drifting to the right every play or what happened there that helped out his pass protection. But despite the PFF grades looking a little wonky for him the last couple years, I feel very confident that you're getting a balanced, good starter at right tackle there. Obviously a very complete group, but their depth is pretty insane too, at least in terms of interesting players. I mean, you got James Hudson's your first tackle in. He played a decent amount last year, did struggle in pass protection, which wasn't a huge surprise, but was really nice as a run blocker. He was always going to be a developmental tackle. I'm not horribly worried that he struggled as a pass protector. That's not much of a surprise. I always felt like he was going to be a year 3 and beyond type of player, and this is year 3. So if he has to play, I'd be fascinated to see what he can do. But they might actually turn to 4th round pick DeJuan Jones, local out of Ohio State. I had a first to a second round grade on DeJuan Jones, and I don't really know why he fell. I heard rumors that some were concerned about his ability to manage his weight and that he was bummed that his basketball career didn't work out and that he wouldn't be all in on his football career. I don't know how much weight there is to that, but what I'm saying is there's nothing about his tape or his physical ability that tells me this guy can't be Orlando Brown or Trent Brown. He, to me, is an even better pass protecting prospect than those guys were. I think he's got a mean streak as a run blocker. If he doesn't care about football, it does not show on the field. And he's been balling out in the preseason so far. So I think they got a total steal here. I think this is a big enough steal that there's a world where Jack Conklin goes down because he has struggled to stay healthy. And they say, DeJuan Jones, you're up. And they don't look back. And they just roll with DeJuan Jones the rest of the way, whether Conklin's healthy or not. I think he can legitimately be Orlando Brown within the first couple of years of his career. So I thought that was an incredible steal, one of the best ones in the draft. That rounds out some very interesting tackle depth, but their interior depth is fascinating too. They got a couple guys that have been around, Michael Dunn, Drew Forbes, not so much fascinated in them, even though they might be their highest floor backups right now. But Nick Harris was supposed to be their starting center last year. I think it was a 5th round pick out of Washington, but it was a really great athlete who got to learn under J.C. Treader for a year, and that was kind of a succession plan that they were ready for. Obviously, Harris goes down. Pochich played well enough that Harris missed out on his opportunity here. But I'm not done giving up on Nick Harris. I think he still needs to prove that he can pass protect, but his athleticism within a wide zone blocking scheme, I really think he could be a quality starter for somebody, whether that's the Browns or someone else. But definitely keep an eye on him. If anything happened to Pochich, maybe a reverse season for Nick Harris, I don't know. But then they also draft Luke Whippler, who likewise fell out of Ohio State. He was a little bit undersized and had some injury concerns, so I at least understood why he fell. But if he's healthy, they stole crazy good value, and he'd be a good fit as well. So their center depth is really nice. Guard depth is a little bit more iffy. Harris and Whippler are smaller guys. I don't know that I would trust them to hold up as guards necessarily. They're more center builds. So if anything happened to Bitonio or Teller, that might be kind of the kryptonite for this O-line. But love this group, obviously. Again, ranking 3rd for overall offensive line, 7th in pass protection, 1st in run blocking. It is, I suppose, worth noting that they have one of the worst groups of skill blockers in the league. Their receivers are pretty indifferent in terms of run blocking. Their tight ends aren't particularly good run blockers. Njoku's fine, but it's still not enough to take them down from being the number one group in run blocking in the league. So that rounds out the offense overall. They do come out as my number one run game in the NFL. It's not a huge surprise. You've got obviously the number one run blocking, the number one running back. That alone should get you there. But they also have a QB that can get involved and a really creative play designer in the run game with Kevin Stefanski. So, I don't think it's crazy. They finished fifth in run defense. Run offense. Stevie Away last year, first the year before that. But in the passing game, they ranked 16th, smack dab in the middle of the league. That's obviously going to be very make or break depending on what Deshaun Watson gives you. Feel pretty good about what the rest of the pieces are going to give you. Maybe the exception of wide receiver 2 and 3, but not really worried about that. Just definitely comes down to Deshaun Watson. And if he plays like he did last year, this is going to be a bottom 10 passing game. If he plays in the middle of his old self and what he was last year, I've got them basically at 16th for the most part. And then if he's elite Deshaun Watson, or borderline elite Deshaun Watson, if you will, this is going to be a top 10 passing game with the best run game in the NFL. And that's before we even talk about this defense. That's a really nice group itself. But let's get into that. Starting with the defensive line, which is a top 5 defensive line in the NFL for me, ranking 4th in pass rush in the NFL and 13th in D-line run defense. It is that D-line run defense that is going to be so unbelievably improved from what they were last year. I do want to start this off by saying, for those that want to point out that the Browns disappointed last year, obviously Deshaun Watson was a part of that, but I don't think many people truly understand how big of an upgrade this group is. It was a literal group of practice squatters playing opposite of Myles Garrett last year at every other position. You had Jordan Elliott and Tommy Togiai getting significant snaps. Taven Bryan was the best they had other than Myles Garrett, and he should be a backup elsewhere. Perrion Winfrey, who's not even on this team anymore. I don't know what happened to him, honestly. On the edge, you had Alex Wright, who you can see there with a 63 grade. He played freaking 543 snaps for this team. A dude that had a 37 run defense grade, despite getting all those snaps. Those guys we mentioned earlier, Winfrey, Togiai, Elliott, respectively, 36, 37.8, and 33. Between those 4 players, that's 2,000 snaps. I know PFF run defense grade isn't king, but they do kind of speak for themselves. And I was sitting here in the preseason saying this Browns defensive line, other than Myles Garrett, is probably the worst position group and the biggest individual need for any team in the NFL heading into the offseason. And then they go out and don't just get replacement level starters that would be a huge upgrade from what they had last year. They go out and get Dalvin Tomlinson, Shelby Harris, and Zadarius Smith. Like, are you fucking kidding me? I don't remember the last time a position group saw this big of an upgrade across the board at 3 spots. So throw out everything you thought you knew about this Browns defense between bad defensive coaching and Joe Woods and a putrid defensive line other than Myles Garrett. Insert Jim Schwartz, who loves his D-line, and this group. That's the baseline for this defense that is going to have more talent as we go. But I really do think this is going to be the group that takes the Browns over the hump and proves a lot of those people that have told me I have the Browns too low or too high and proves those people wrong. But let's highlight these guys individually, though. They're all pretty well known. There shouldn't be too much to say about this group. But let's start with Myles Garrett and give him his flowers. I mean, despite playing with that defensive line that we already mentioned, despite being the most double-teamed player in the NFL, over 30% of his snaps he faced chip help or true double-team help, he still came out with a 18-sack season, the number 1 pass rush grade per PFF, 73 pressures, number 1 in the NFL in pass rush win rate. I really enjoyed getting back into some Browns film to get to watch Myles Garrett play, because it's just a reminder to me that I think he's the best pass rushing edge player in the NFL. I ran the big poll on Twitter yesterday. Steelers fans were very upset that I didn't include TJ Watt. And maybe there's an argument that TJ Watt's overall game with run defense and coverage is better, but man, I really do think he is the most unblockable edge in the league right now, because not only is he the literal prototype that we say that's what a true number one edge rusher is supposed to look like. 6'5", 270, fast, bendy, quick, like all the physical tools are there, the length, you name it. Not only does he have that side of things, but he also has done the opposite of what someone like Jadeveon Clowney has done throughout his career and actually worked at his skill set. He has that incredible speed to power bull rush, but he's got spin moves. He's got rip moves. He knows how to set moves up and really deconstruct blocks. Like, he is such a special overall pass rusher. And I think this is I know we've said this now for 3 straight years. I think this is the year he gets Defensive Player of the Year. I really do. Aaron Donald doesn't seem to be as big of a threat there anymore. And now this defensive line should open things up much more for him. And it's not like his numbers have to come up that much. You know, if his pressure rate goes up 2% and he gets an extra sack, that's probably enough to get him Defensive Player of the Year. In fact, he could have easily won it last year if the Browns defense was as good as, you know, the Cowboys or Niners defense was, right? Where Parsons and Bosa were your league leaders. So it's close in terms of who the best edge rusher in the NFL is. But for now, I'm going to go slight nod towards Myles Garrett. Then you go to the other side with Zadarius Smith, who I'm excited to see which team he forces his way onto next year, because it's been a turnstile for him off the field. But when he's on the field, there's no denying, as a number 2 pass rusher, he's the best in the NFL. I don't think it's even close. He would be a number 1 for 24 teams in the league. Like, I genuinely think he's a top 10 edge rusher in the NFL. And his numbers over the last 3 or 4 years make that inarguable. Like, there might be some availability concerns in terms of health and his feuding with coaches saying, you want me to defend the run, pay me more to do that, or write it in my contract. Like, there is something to his psyche that I don't necessarily love, but the dude's insane on the field, and it's led to the production. And I think the Browns are going to get that yet again here, at least as a pass rusher. And the fun thing is, we'll talk about Okoronkwo in a minute, but they can get into 5-man rushes up front and use Zadarius Smith as that rush linebacker, where when he's lined up as a rush linebacker, I can't confirm this, but I would bet he has the best pass rush win rate out of like any edge rusher. Like, his instincts and creativity to get through the interior of an offensive line and a running back as just kind of a roamer, as a blitzer, and a lot of these defenses he's played for have literally just said, you know, you don't even have a gap necessarily. Well, I can't confirm that either, but it feels like they say, hey, just walk up to the line, buzz around, kind of feel out where you want to rush from, and go cause chaos and get to the quarterback. And he's got a unique ability to do that. So they're going to be able to do that because they have a guy like Okoronkwo, who, like I said in the intro, they were ready to have Okoronkwo be their number 2 edge rusher before they got Zadarius. So I think he's in the ultimate position to succeed. He's not going to face double teams because you have to double team Myles Garrett. Shit, he might have a career year. This acquisition was an unbelievable get for this staff. And the fact that in 2 off seasons, they've turned a 5th-round pick into Amari Cooper and Zadarius Smith. What are we doing, NFL? Do we want Deshaun Watson to have success? Like, come on now. The one knock on Z is the run defense. I kind of alluded to it with some of the contract stuff. Like, he is a good run defender when he wants to be, which is not particularly often. But if you've got a critical 3rd down and you got him out there, he has all of the tools and ability to do that. But there will be reps where he's getting completely washed out, poor pad level and poor effort. And it's just something you kind of live with Zadarius, and teams have lived with it for years. But we might as well talk about Okoronkwo and just finish up the edge in general. Before we go to the interior group. We already talked about Okoronkwo, but you know, the Browns had signed him, I think, prepared to make him a starter, because you look at the last 2 years of his career, and he's shown that he's a hyper instinctive, creative, bendy pass rusher all across the board. And it wasn't until late last season for Houston that he really became a full-time starter for the first time. But Jesus, dude, every time he's played, he's been really efficient. You go back to his second year in the league in 2020, 21 pressures on only 140 pass rush snaps. 2021, basically the same exact deal, up to a PFF pass rush grade of 75. Like, he's making a legit impact as a rotational rusher. And then Houston signs him. Good pro scouting on their end with Nick Caserio and the guys out there in Houston. Probably should have retained him, though, because he basically became a full-time starter by year's end. He ended up with 36 pressures, 5 sacks, a PFF pass rush grade of 82, all on just 268 pass rush snaps. I don't know why nobody has really wanted to give him a full-time shot. Maybe it's because he's a little bit undersized, and if you asked him to play a full-time role, he might be a little bit more inconsistent. But again, here, you don't have to ask him to do that. And it's not just the grades and the stats. The film shows it. I walked away really impressed with him for the Rams the year before. And then the same thing happened when I watched the Texans tape for their deep dive. Like, he's a legit player. Do not sleep on Agbanjo Okoronkwo. He would be a starting edge for a large chunk of teams around the league. And here he can just continue to cause chaos and be the ideal number 3 for this Browns team. So I think this is inarguably the best edge group in the league. I think you have the best edge rusher in the NFL. I think you have the best number 2 edge rusher in the league. And you might arguably have the best number 3 edge rusher in the league in Okoronkwo. So, yeah, this defensive line is just a little bit better than it was last year. We'll rip through the depth real quick. Alex Wright played a ton last year, hated this draft pick, hated his tape. Big, lengthy guy that has poor pad level and needs to get better. They draft Isaiah McGuire in the 4th round. I had actually a higher grade on Lonnie Phelps, who they get as an undrafted pickup. Not saying I'm right necessarily, but I wasn't particularly high on Isaiah McGuire. I think he's got some nice quickness. He's got some instincts as a rusher. Didn't love his run defense. I think he's fine. Maybe someday can be a rotational backup, and he doesn't necessarily have to be much this year. But then they got Isaiah Thomas. Between Wright and Isaiah Thomas, I will say it would be really nice if one of these guys can become more consistent against the run. It's not that big of an ask, and theoretically both those guys were good at it in college. I don't see much pass rushing potential between Wright and Thomas, but with Za'Darius's indifference to defend the run and Okoronkwo being a little bit of a smaller edge, you would love if one of these guys could step up and help them out to create more third downs so that guys like Za'Darius and Okoronkwo can get after the quarterback. I would say that's probably the biggest weakness of this D-line is run defense depth on both the edge and the interior. But then Lonnie Phelps, who I mentioned, I did have a 4th to a 5th round grade on Lonnie Phelps. I actually legitimately liked his tape and his tools as a pass rusher. I would just say he's undersized. He's kind of Agbanjo Okoronkwo-esque. Probably someone they stash on the practice squad. But if anything happened to Za'Darius or Okoronkwo, I wouldn't be stunned if Phelps is the second best pass rusher they have off the edge as an option. But yeah, now you talk about the interior, which is just, it's crazy how much better this group is. Dalvin Tomlinson, certified stud nose tackle. It speaks for himself in terms of run defense and his ability to eat space and get off blocks. He's been doing that since he came into the league, and no reason he won't do that again here for the Browns. It's what he's done as a pass rusher, though, the last 2 or 3 years that's really impressed. He's developed some instincts and ability to get you, 30, 35 pressures a year, a few sacks. Like, he's not a complete waste on third downs. Now, there will be snaps where they probably take him or Shelby off the field, go with the 3 edge guys, with maybe Garrett as a 4-eye or Za'Darius as that rush linebacker, different dime looks. But it's not going to be every time. Like, you can just rush these 4 and Tomlinson can get home. And then Shelby Harris is like the perfect 3 technique here, man. You got your nose in Dalvin, and then Shelby is a 3 tech. He's a little bit on the smaller side, but dude, Shelby Harris still showed that he can play for Seattle. As I was getting through that Seahawks tape, I was so mad at myself for not collecting Shelby Harris footage for whatever team he ultimately signed with so I could really showcase just how good he was for Seattle. But he was still sitting there as a free agent, and I wasn't sure if it was going to be worth my time in case he signed with a team that we had already done for the series. But, man, I'm not kidding. Shelby Harris, still wowed me last year, and I had him circled as probably the best available free agent, and then the Browns go and get him. Like, are you kidding me? As if they didn't do enough for this defensive line. And you look at the depth, and you can really see how badly they needed another, not just good starter, but anybody that was an adequate starter. And Shelby is still a good player. Like, he would be the best 3 technique for a bunch of teams in the NFL, and they got him for nothing. He's a good 2-way player, especially as a 3 technique against the run. Like, he doesn't have the size to 2 gap, but he's not going to have to do that here with Dalvin and even Siaki Ika in here. They can just line him up as a shade outside of the guard, where he's super disruptive. He's super strong with his hands, excellent technique to shed, great eyes, and a bunch of different ways that he wins as a pass rusher too. This was a huge luxury to get him, but he completes this defensive line in a way that I even couldn't have imagined. As far as the depth goes, though, a lot of these guys played last year and stunk. Jordan Elliott was never a fan of that draft pick. That one's looking like a win for me at this point. Like, he just doesn't get it as a defensive lineman. Played way too many snaps for his own good last year, and it didn't seem to help his development. He can do some things as a pass rusher, and, taking Dalvin Tomlinson off the field and putting Elliott in there isn't the worst thing you could possibly do, but let's just say that Browns fans will be happy that Jordan Elliott's snap count is going to go down by about 60% this year. They do sign Tristan Hill, who I think they were encouraged by before they got the opportunity to get Shelby Harris. Hill is a replacement level option. I don't mind him as a DT 3 or 4. A really good athlete and another guy that can rush the passer a little bit, but not a good run defender. That's really where they're hoping Siaki Ika can step in as a backup nose tackle to Dalvin Tomlinson, someone that can increase this rotation where either you take Tomlinson off or you take Shelby Harris off. Tomlinson can be a 3 tech and Ika can be a nose. As long as Ika's okay defending the run, they should have enough depth to get by there. It's not a guarantee, though, because Ika, strangely enough, at Baylor, did better things as a pass rusher at times than as a run defender. His good run defense was much more in spurts, in my opinion, because he's so big and pretty athletic at his size, but I think he had a little bit of that kind of Big 12 stereotype where they're not necessarily known for their physicality and run defense. So I think you got to learn to, get that consistency in terms of pad level and gap discipline built into him a little bit more before you can rely on him as a run defender, but he should at least be able to eat space and be decent in that regard. They do sign Maurice Hurst. Good undersized player, very much Shelby Harris-esque with everything we said about Shelby. Not quite as good, but that's only when he's healthy, and that's been very few and far between. It's almost a guarantee that he won't be available for this Browns team, but why not sign him and maybe get a healthy year out of him. And then Tommy Togi, I thought was a decent pick when they made it, but year 1 was kind of a disaster for him. He's buried pretty low in the depth chart right now, so hopefully they don't have to see too much of him. Overall, interior defensive line depth is still a question mark, but you do have guys that were starting for you last year now as depth, and even some better pieces like Ika and Tristan Hill in there. That alone would have been upgrades from what they had last year. So obviously I'm just raving about this defensive line. I think when I saw the comments that are like, how are the Browns not revealed yet? How are the Browns not revealed yet? I'm like, have you looked at their defensive line? Like, this defense is going to be so much better thanks to these guys in both phases. And then you get the linebackers, and this group's just okay. I think this is probably the weakest position group on the team, which is fine. I mean, if linebacker is your worst position, I would probably prefer that. I just don't think linebackers, for the most part, make a massive difference on the game unless you can get your hands on a Roquan Smith or a Fred Warner, and that's just really hard to do. Not everyone can have that. But they're not like horrible at linebacker. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, Anthony Walker, Sion Takitaki, they together all rank 13th in linebacker coverage, which is top half in the league. They're actually solid there. But 23rd in linebacker run defense with some more question marks with that phase of the game. Let's start with JOK. I love JOK as much as the next guy. Consistency's been a little bit hit or miss for him and held him back, whether that's injuries or on the field consistency. He's one of these undersized linebackers that kind of knows he's not going to take on a lot of blockers. So if he goes up against a scheme that's really good at sending linemen his way, he's going to be much more boom or bust as a run defender. He'll kind of take bad angles at times, undershoot his gap, and just kind of take himself out of the play at times. And then if a lineman does get their hands on him, he can get washed out. So like, there's definitely inconsistencies there, but his speed and instincts do lead to a lot of splash plays as a run defender too. And some weeks when he guesses right, and he can have some really nice weeks. As a coverage player, there's a lot to like. I don't really have any criticisms there. It's just a matter of continuing to grow there and show that he could be like a superstar coverage linebacker. But I like his instincts, love his athleticism. You can go man coverage, go zone, you name it. He's a big reason why they're in the top half of linebacker coverage. And then you got Anthony Walker next to him, coming back from injury. You know, they like Anthony Walker. He's a team captain. He's a balanced linebacker. He's a nice piece to have next to JOK because he's a better athlete and a better coverage player than like Sione Takitaki when they have to go to him. But he actually brings some of that size to play Mike and get between the guards and do a little bit more of the dirty work. And, he's not great at it. He's just really average across the board. But getting him back is going to be nice for this team. It's nothing crazy, but it felt like, kind of shuffling once Walker got hurt last year and ended up with this crazy rotation of linebackers that was hard to keep track of. And I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case this year, though I do think they will find ways to rotate in Takitaki. And I think they can actually, if they do this well with Jim Schwartz, they can actually do this in a way that is complementary with JOK. And I think there's a way that they can play this linebacker rotation where it's all very complementary. You know, Walker's your balanced overall player. JOK is kind of your weak side, passing downs linebacker, if you will. And then Takitaki, I think, can come in if they want to go to like a base 4-3 front, or even going as far as rotating JOK off the field on earlier downs. Takitaki is a really good run defender. He's got the size to do that. Pretty consistent tackler, physical dude. They've done a good job sheltering him in coverage. It feels like he grades out well in coverage every year, but is mostly just covering the flat and short zones. He's just not a great athlete in space. But he's definitely a useful player to have his kind of skill set, I suppose, for certain packages. And you could probably do worse in terms of linebacker depth if one of these guys goes down, but Takitaki is just a pretty low upside linebacker in general. And then you got, pretty damn deep group of linebackers. No one I'm horribly interested in. Matthew Adams been a journeyman. Tony Fields played last year, very hit or miss. Instinctive guy, but a long way to go. Jordan Kanasic played last year as a part of that crazy group of linebackers that was all playing last year. He actually showed some flashes in the game I watched. I don't know too much about him, but I was like, hey, who's that? What was he wearing, number 47 or something? I was like, who's that guy? Oh, okay, Jordan Kanasic. I see you. But obviously nothing you're counting on there. They do pick up Mohamed Diabite out of Utah. Kind of a lanky, instinctive coverage player. Needs to learn how to defend the run. Might be a decent practice squad stash. And then Jacob Phillips is going to go to IR. I know this is harsh, but I think that's kind of a blessing in disguise. He's never been someone I'm terribly high on. I think they've felt like they want to rotate him in because he was a third-round pick. And I'm just like, I don't know, man. He's not a good player. Why are you messing around with it? Obviously sucks that he got hurt, and I'm an asshole for even saying that, but I think it's kind of a blessing in disguise for the Browns. But anyway, yeah, there's your linebacker group. They ranked 19th overall, so not even like bad necessarily, just probably not a group that's going to really make or break the team's season, as is the case with most linebacker rooms. And then we've got our last position group, and I know you're sitting there like, dang, okay, this roster's looking pretty damn good. The secondary must not be very good. Where's the weakness here? And there is not a weakness other than potentially quarterback. This secondary is freaking awesome. I think they're remarkably underrated, and nobody's talking about them. You have, in my opinion, am I ready to say the best cornerback trio in the NFL? It's possible. I mean, the Jets is pretty special. Eagles is pretty damn good. I tend to forget about them because their guys are older, but yeah, man, if this ended up the best cornerback trio in the NFL this year, I certainly would be the least bit surprised. You start with Denzel Ward. who had an up and down year last year, but I think that was so scheme specific. I mean, Denzel Ward is truly one of the best bump and run man cover corners in the league. With his athleticism, that's some of the best of any corner in the league, and his technique, his just route anticipation and reaction time, it's all so sensational. But, you know, they're asking him to play off quarters and like jump routes and diagnose the quarterback's decision making. And it's not that he's bad at that, but it was almost a mirror image of like Green Bay with Jair Alexander at times. It's like, why are you overthinking this? Just put him on the number one wide receiver and don't worry about it. And they didn't do that as much as they probably should have last year. And I think with Jim Schwartz coming in, they're going to let Denzel Ward just be Denzel Ward. So everybody knows he's a great corner, but I think this could be a year where he reminds everybody just how good he is as someone that should be in that conversation with Jair and Sauce and Surtain as like, who's the best corner in the NFL? I think there's a world where that's Denzel Ward this year. If not, it's not like he's going to be anything short of a star top 10 corner otherwise. Like, he is just so good. And then you got Greg Newsome. And I'm pretty convinced if Greg Newsome played for one of these, you know, bigger market teams that's in prime time all the time, he would get the recognition he deserves as one of the best CB2s in the league. Was a first-round pick 2 years ago. Super athletic, brilliant-minded corner, like really good in zone. He was a really good fit in the more like quarters-heavy defense. Just with his route recognition and acceleration and fluid hips. And that's, I guess, something to keep an eye on is just how good is he in press man coverage and in a different system here. But the thing is, like, he's still been good at that when they asked him to do it in Joe Woods' defense. So while it's something to keep an eye on, it's not a concern for me. I think he can absolutely handle it. He's got the length. He's got the speed. He was every bit a first-round cornerback prospect with all the tools in the world and has done nothing but play at a very high level, although not an elite level or anything, but he's been a really good number 2 corner here. And not a lot of people, I think, are aware of that. Maybe this year that changes. And then just because the Browns wanted to show that we're all assholes, they hit on Martin Emerson in the 3rd round. Forced his way into the starting lineup for this team as early as week 1 and really never looked back. Not a perfect player. You know, I don't think he has like elite speed and he's a little bit on the grabby side, but as a kind of 3rd corner here, a young player who's got a skill set that we know plays in the league, there's no reason to believe he can't be like the best CB3 in the NFL. I think a lot of teams would be ecstatic if Martin Emerson was looking as their number 2 corner this year. Like, he reminds me a lot of like a young Jalen Johnson for the Bears, for example. If there's a knock on that trio, it's that all 3 could take a look at their run defense and do a little bit better, whether it's tackling consistency, getting off blocks, getting to the ball. But if that's your criticism and you really don't have any other ones, you're doing better than pretty much anyone in the league with your cornerback room. So don't sleep on the Browns corners. But it's not like these safeties are scrubs either. And I think in like a worst case scenario with Juan Thornhill and Delpit, they're going to be just solid starters that don't really like ruin this defense. But I think there's a chance that this is actually a pretty sneaky good safety duo. I'm not going to go crazy and say top 10 or anything that gets me in trouble, but like, I like these 2 players is what I'm getting at. You know, Juan Thornhill gets brought in on a 3-year, $21 million contract, had an up and down career for the Chiefs, was flirted with getting benched at times, had big weeks, had down weeks, was a 2nd round pick 4 years ago. And, you know, has a lot of physical tools on the back end, someone that played slot corner in college and for that reason, they asked a lot of him in that Chiefs defense. One play would be manning up slot receivers and tight ends. The next he's playing quarters. The next he's playing free safety. The next he's buzzing down. Like, he had to wear a lot of different hats for a young player. It's not easy. And I'm not trying to sell him as some lockdown coverage player. Like, he's going to have some blown assignments. He's going to fail to read out routes and not get there on time. There's times where they will ask him to man up wide receivers, and he doesn't quite have the physical tools to do that. But what I will say is that he really came on and played his best football in the second half of last season. And I think this Jim Schwartz defense is going to be very similar in what they ask of their safeties to kind of do a little bit of everything and wear a lot of different hats. And if you get the Juan Thornhill he's been over the course of his career, he's a fine player and you won't really regret the $7 million a year. It'll be kind of whatever. But if you get the guy he was in the second half of last year and he's actually getting better, then he could be a sort of borderline stud of a safety for you. I would probably bet on the former and say he's going to be just solid and not a weak link, and that's going to be totally fine when you have the cornerback room that they have. But I guess we'll see. Now, I'm probably even a little bit more optimistic for the future of Grant Delpit, and maybe it's just because I really liked him coming out in the draft, but the film started to show it last year, started to show a lot of those traits. I fell in love with him at LSU. He's a 6'2 safety with all of the size to play down in the box, instinctive in coverage, with good ball skills, decent reactionary quickness for a bigger safety. It's kind of a poor man's Jamal Adams coming out of LSU. And, he falls in the draft a little bit, like mid to early second round. So it wasn't some dramatic fall, but he kind of falls because of tackling consistency was the big knock on him. And that was fair. Like, I understood that, but I always felt like you can coach a guy up how to tackle when he has these tools. And then unfortunately he tears his ACL, I think, in his rookie year before we got to see him. So his career was set back, certainly from what it could have been early, but he started rotating in his first year in 2021. Some of those tackling concerns showed up week to week. Coverage was a little bit hit or miss. And then 2022 comes and he gets out there, earns a starting job, played a little bit of everything for them, and was ultimately able to keep that starting job, I think, because the tackling reached a point that you're pretty comfortable with. Only missed 10% of his tackles, which is league average for a starter. Like, you're not so much worried about the tackling at this point. And now it's like, okay, he made some plays in coverage last year. He's got the versatility to kind of do anything in this scheme. The upside's pretty high for Grant Delpit. And at this point, I don't know if I'm going to have time to get my top 10 breakouts players video out before the season starts. But if I do, Grant Delpit, I would almost assuredly be on that list for breakout players for the entire league. Like, I do believe in his ability to make an impact for this defense and not just be an okay player, but actually turn into a pretty good safety. And I think you especially look at some of the plays he made down in the box in run defense last year and feel really optimistic that he's playing with that speed and confidence to get him up to that level. But that said, they also signed Rodney McLeod, who we raved about in the intro. His tape for the Colts was just so good last year. This dude's one of the smartest safeties in the NFL. Not the fastest guy, not the biggest guy, but he is an all-around just good defensive back. I've seen enough from him for the last 10-plus years to know that, and I didn't see a physical drop-off in his game. Really good signing for the Browns. And I think with Delpit and Thornhill's ability to kind of play dime back, let's just say, as a kind of quasi-slot corner, box safety, strong safety, dime linebacker, like between the two of them, you can use them down towards the line of scrimmage a little bit more and use McLeod over the top as a more of a deep safety. I think when they go dime, which should be a decent amount because their linebacker room isn't anything special, I think McLeod's going to be that first guy in, and I think he's going to have weeks where he makes an impact for this defense. So it really is a complete group without a weak link and a ton of upside. Their depth is very bland. Cornerback, you've got Mike Ford, who's been a journeyman veteran. Okay, whatever. I do like the Cam Mitchell pick in the 5th round. I thought he had a lot of similarities to Greg Newsome, but just every nice thing we said about Greg Newsome turned down about 10 to 15% on the dial as a prospect. But good tools to be a potential solid backup and a good 5th round pick. AJ Green, big-bodied guy. Don't know if he'll make the team. Same with Chris Westry. Kind of both those guys in the Martin Emerson mold a little bit. Wouldn't be stunned if they just keep 5 corners here, though, because they've got so many good players elsewhere in the roster. And then the safety depth, McLeod counts as depth, so that's really good depth to have if any of these guys go down or if Thornhill and Delpit struggle. But beyond McLeod, there's really nobody. DeAnthony Bell was an intriguing traits-based prospect last year. Good special teamer to have. Big, fast, thumping safety. They do pick up Ronnie Hickman out of Ohio State. He had a lot of fans in the draft. I thought he was just okay. Smart player all around. Probably makes the team. Maybe could be a replacement level backup, but not a lot of physical tools. And I'd be surprised if he turns into a whole lot in the NFL. And that'll probably round out. Like, I don't think Nate Meters or McAllister make it. So there's your secondary. Again, they rank 5th in the NFL for coverage. The DB run support ranking comes in 21st through 28th. It's just, they're fine. You know, the cornerbacks, like, they're not getting a lot of help from the slot, which, by the way, I didn't even really mention. Like, I don't think they have a designated slot corner here. I think it's going to be kind of week to week, depending on how they want to play it. But I do feel pretty good that those 3 are going to be starting. I think all 3 can do it, depending on who they're playing. But, yeah, the run defense from the corners kind of holds them back from being anything special. They don't have any dominant run defending safeties. But overall, I think they're fine. So you put all those pieces together, and they come out as the 12th best defense in the league. They do, however, come out as the 4th best pass defense. This is a team with that pass rush and that secondary that is totally crafted to dominate the Bills and the Chiefs and the Bengals, like these really good pass game teams. The run defense is improved from last year, undoubtedly. I think they still bring some questions to the table with the linebackers and some of the interior D-line depth and the edge run defense depth. I don't think they'll be perfect against the run. I think some run-heavy teams will be able to get theirs against the Browns and put them in tough spots. But this defense overall has like easy potential to be a top 10 unit, especially looking towards that secondary there with so much young talent. So let's recap everything before we get out of here. 9th for overall offense, 12th for overall defense. They do come out a little bit lower at special teams. The kicker, Cade York, is very mid, and the Browns, typically not the best special teams unit. So it's a questionable unit, something to keep an eye on. Their overall strengths and weaknesses, though, I mean, their strengths are like where you want to be great. O-line, pass rush, secondary, some of the most critical positions in the sport. Run game as well, just overall run game, from the running backs to the play design to the run blocking. It's going to be, as we mentioned, the best ranking run game heading into the year. This team has some of the most prominent strengths of any team in the league. And their weaknesses are less distinguishable, I'll put it that way. Obviously, uncertainty at quarterback. But there's a world where quarterback is a strength for them, right? There's a pretty standard world where quarterback is neither a strength nor a weakness, just kind of middle of the road. But there is a world where quarterback is a weakness, and they struggle in the passing game because Deshaun Watson can't read the field, right? So that's the overwhelming potential weakness for them. But beyond that, it's like run support from the second level with the linebackers and the secondary just being kind of below average. Okay, is that a huge problem to have for the most part? No, not really. And then it's that kind of mysterious, like, Browns gonna Browns team culture question. Is it a Stefanski leadership thing? Maybe, maybe not. Is it a curse? Maybe, maybe not. Is it because they traded for a sex offender at quarterback? Maybe, maybe not. That's like a team weakness, is are the Browns gonna Browns? But like I said, that's a very indistinguishable thing. But it is what it is, and we kind of all know that it's there, even if we can't point to exactly what it is. They have to overcome that, right? And then special teams, which is fluky year to year anyway. So, we led the video off saying, if Deshaun Watson can remember how to quarterback, this team should win the Super Bowl. And I just don't know how that's controversial to say when you go through this team and look at how talented this roster is. I really think that you can make a case this is the best roster in the NFL, and ranking that team 9th just doesn't seem crazy to me. Let's wrap up by looking at their schedule, and it's probably not a surprise. I would take the over on this team. Now, there's an ethical dilemma you have to go through. on whether or not you want to cheer for Deshaun Watson, but from a value perspective, I would say this is a good value to bet on the Browns. I think for an AFC schedule, this is incredibly favorable. I see 5 games that they should really take care of business on. And if you're getting a pretty solid baseline of 5 wins in the AFC with at Indy, Arizona, at the Rams, Chicago at home, and at Houston, and then you're talking about you just got to go 5-7 in all of your other games to get to 10 wins, that just seems like a pretty good bet, especially when a lot of those other games are winnable. You get Cincinnati at home in week 1. We don't know if Joe Burrow is going to be 100% in that game. You get Tennessee at home week 3. I think at Seattle is a favorable matchup for them because of the line play discrepancy. And then I really think they can go head-to-head against Baltimore, against Pittsburgh twice each, at Denver, Jacksonville, the Jets. Like, I just think this team is going to be a super competitive, good football team. So I like the over of 9 wins. Now, you want to bet division odds at 4-1. I think there's a little bit of value there. You know, the Bengals are going to be, it's going to be tough to get past the Bengals in this division. Ravens as well. Like, they're going to be right there. We just did the Ravens. They're neck and neck with the Browns. I think 4-1 odds is pretty close to accurate, maybe a slight value there. Super Bowl odds at 30-1 is really interesting to me because I think that's a really good value on the sticker price, because it's basically like if Deshaun Watson is what he once was, you're going to get a lot of value on that 30-1 price tag. But, and this might rub Browns fans the wrong way, and I'm never a guy to be like the NFL is rigged. But if it was ever going to be a time where in the AFC divisional round or an AFC championship, the NFL would tell the refs, like, hey, if you get a chance to fuck the Browns over, maybe throw that flag, because we don't want the publicity of Deshaun Watson in his first full season in the Super Bowl. I don't know how takey that is or not. I think some of that might be baked into those Super Bowl odds. I don't know. Definitely let me know if I'm crazy for that or if I'm onto something there. But that's all we've got. This was a strangely fun team to talk about, even though there's no team in the league that I would prefer to see lose and not be as good as I think they will be. But if I'm being objective about this football team, they have a ton of talent and have insane upside. So I hope you guys enjoyed. These are definitely going to be coming out pretty much every other day for the next week and a half until we get to the season. It is full pedal to the metal, so hope you guys have been loving the series. Please do hit that like button if you have. Make sure you're subscribed if you aren't already, and we'll see you for the next one. Peace out.